Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in every person's life when they find themselves in a season of isolation. It feels like the world is moving on, yet you're standing still, alone with your thoughts, emotions, and sometimes doubts. But I want you to understand this today. God uses isolation to prepare you for blessings. There are moments in life when we are forced into solitude, when everything around us seems to pause and we are left alone to reflect, process, and face our innermost thoughts. Whenever your flesh overloads with unnecessary work, in these moments of isolation, the world may seem to fade away, leaving only our true selves exposed. It is here, in the stillness, that God begins to do his most profound work in us. The noise of society fades, and we are no longer distracted by the opinions of others or the pressures of daily life. What remains is the raw, unfiltered version of who we are. Isolation has a way of stripping away the facades we often build around ourselves. We may present an image to the world that we want others to see, but isolation pulls away the layers and reveals the reality of our heart. It forces us to confront our deepest fears, insecurities, and even the parts of ourselves we have long tried to hide. This is not a punishment. It is a divine opportunity. In this space, God reveals to us the areas of our lives that need healing, growth, and refinement. It is here that we can no longer escape from the truth of who we are. We are often quick to point out the flaws in others, but isolation gives us the chance to look inward and see our own shortcomings. It is in this confrontation with ourselves that we experience true transformation. We must allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to see our weaknesses, not to condemn ourselves, but to recognize the areas where we need God's intervention. In isolation, God shows us who we really are, not the person we have constructed to please others, but the authentic self He created us to be. We often find that we are more capable, more resilient, and more powerful than we ever thought. But this revelation is only possible in the quiet moments of solitude. It is easy to run from the truth of who we are, but isolation doesn't allow us to escape. It forces us to stand in the presence of our own reflection. And through that, we begin to understand our potential, our purpose, and the greatness God has placed within us. When we find ourselves in isolation, we may feel abandoned, forgotten, or even rejected. But what we fail to understand is that God is using this time to reveal the very core of our being. The person we were meant to become cannot emerge in the chaos of daily life, but only in the stillness where we can hear God's voice. Isolation brings us face to face with our true identity, the one that is not defined by what we do or how others perceive us. In this space, we begin to see ourselves through God's eyes, understanding that we are fearfully and wonderfully made with purpose and significance. It is only when we confront our true self in the presence of God that we can begin to understand the plans He has for us. Without isolation, we would never know who we really are or what we are capable of becoming. Isolation, though uncomfortable, is necessary for growth. It is in the solitude that we are molded and shaped into the individuals God intended us to be. Through this process, we are made ready for the blessings He has in store for us. Blessings that require us to stand firm in our identity and be equipped for the purpose He has called us to fulfill. There are times in life when we find ourselves in seasons of isolation, when we are set apart from the world, away from the noise, the distractions, and the busy demands of everyday life. It is in these moments, when we seem to have been left alone, that God is preparing us for greater responsibility. We often look at isolation as something negative, as though we've been abandoned or forgotten. But in truth, it is a divine setup. It is in these moments of solitude that God is equipping us, refining us, and shaping us for the bigger things that are ahead. The truth is, God will never give us responsibility before we are ready to handle it. He knows our potential, but He also understands the work that needs to be done in us before we can carry the weight of responsibility. When we are isolated, God has the time and space to build the character, the strength, and the wisdom necessary to carry the mantle He wants to place upon us. Responsibility is not something that comes without preparation. It is not something we can just step into without the necessary foundation being laid first. If we were given responsibility too soon, without the proper preparation, we would crumble under the weight of it. It is in isolation that we are tested, refined, and made ready for the task at hand. In the stillness of isolation, we learn patience. We learn to trust God's timing. We learn that there are no shortcuts to the greatness that He has prepared for us. We are forced to grow in ways we never imagined, to build a foundation that will support the responsibility we are about to take on. Through isolation, we learn to carry our burdens. We learn to endure hardship. We learn to persevere, even when it feels like no one is watching, even when it seems like no progress is being made. It is in these seasons of isolation that our faith is tested, and it is through this testing that we are strengthened. We become more resilient, more capable of handling the weight of responsibility. Without isolation, we would never know our true strength. We would never know what we are truly capable of becoming. The responsibility that God desires to give us requires maturity. It requires wisdom. It requires integrity. And these are not things that can be developed in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. These are qualities that are built in the quiet moments, in the solitude, in the times when it's just us and God. It is in these moments that we develop the strength to handle what God is about to entrust to us. God's responsibility is never given without the preparation of the heart. He will never give us something that we are not ready for, and it is in isolation that He makes us ready. Through the trials, the waiting, the testing, and the refining, God is preparing us for the greater things that lie ahead. We may not understand it in the moment, but when the time comes to step into that greater responsibility, we will be equipped, capable, and ready to handle all that God has entrusted to us. There are seasons in life when we find ourselves separated from the noise, the hustle, and the world around us. These moments of isolation may seem uncomfortable, even painful, but it is in these very seasons that God is preparing us for greater responsibility. We often view isolation as a form of rejection or abandonment, but the truth is that God uses it as a powerful tool to prepare us for the work He has ahead. He allows us to be separated for a purpose, to refine us, to shape us, and to get us ready for the greater things He has in store. Responsibility is a weight, and not everyone can carry it. Before we are entrusted with the blessings or tasks that seem so big, God needs to ensure that we are ready to handle them. If He were to give us responsibility too soon, we might not have the capacity to bear the weight, and it could overwhelm us. The process of isolation is essential in preparing us to carry the load of leadership, influence, and responsibility. In isolation, God works on our character. He molds us, strips away the impurities, and builds the strength within us to stand firm when the storms come. Without this refining process, we may not be able to lead, influence, or handle the responsibilities that will come our way. God understands that responsibility is not just about ability, it's about maturity. It's about knowing how to manage what we're given and stewarding it well. He won't place a mantle upon us that we are not yet ready to carry. It is in the quiet and solitude that we grow the inner strength required for the journey ahead. As we are isolated, we begin to see ourselves clearly. We confront our weaknesses, our fears, and our shortcomings. We are forced to look within and deal with the things that would otherwise hold us back from stepping into our full potential. In these moments of solitude, We grow in wisdom. We begin to understand that the responsibility we will carry requires not just physical strength, but mental, emotional, and spiritual fortitude. We are taught to trust God's timing and to wait for His perfect plan to unfold. Without isolation, we would not understand the magnitude of the responsibility that awaits us. In these quiet seasons, God teaches us endurance. He strengthens our resolve and builds in us the perseverance necessary to carry out His will. We become more reliant on Him, learning to trust that His ways are higher and that His plans are perfect. Responsibility comes with challenges, and it requires a foundation of trust and faith. Isolation is where we develop that foundation. It is where we grow in character, humility, and resilience. As we are tested and refined in these moments, we are being prepared for what lies ahead. God knows that we cannot carry the weight of greater responsibility if we have not first learned how to stand firm in the small things. It is in isolation that we are equipped, tested, and transformed. It is in the silence that we learn the true meaning of leadership and responsibility, not just as a task to be done, but as a calling to be fulfilled. Through isolation, we become more than capable to handle the blessings and responsibilities that God will soon entrust to us. There are seasons in our lives when we feel like we are waiting for something to happen, waiting for doors to open, waiting for the blessings that God has promised us. It can be one of the most challenging experiences, feeling like nothing is moving forward while everyone around us seems to be progressing. In these moments, it's easy to become frustrated, impatient, and even discouraged, wondering why God hasn't yet brought what we've been hoping for. But what we fail to realize is that isolation has a purpose. And it is in these times that God is teaching us to trust His timing. It's easy to think that we know the right time for things to happen, but God knows the perfect timing. He knows when we are truly ready to handle what He has for us, even when we feel like we're ready now. The truth is, God's timing is always better than our own. It's in the waiting, the isolation, that we learn the value of trusting God, not only with our future, but with the timing of our destiny. In these quiet moments of solitude, God is teaching us patience. We are often conditioned by the world to expect immediate results, instant gratification, and fast success. But God doesn't operate according to our timelines. He operates according to His divine purpose, and sometimes that means we have to wait. Isolation forces us to slow down, to stop trying to rush ahead, and to realize that the best things come in God's perfect time. Waiting may not be easy, but it's in these moments that we are prepared for the great things He has in store. As we wait, we are refined, shaped, and built up in ways that we couldn't possibly imagine if we were constantly rushing forward. Trusting God's timing means surrendering our own plans and allowing God to lead us on the path that He has already prepared. It means acknowledging that He knows the bigger picture while we can only see a small part of the story. During the times of isolation, God is teaching us to align our will with His will, to let go of our timelines, and to trust that He is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it. In the silence, God is orchestrating things that we cannot even comprehend. He is opening doors at the right time, positioning us for opportunities that will come when we are ready. The key is trusting that God's timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't match our own expectations. The waiting is not wasted. It's not a delay. It's a preparation. It's in this time that we learn the discipline to wait with faith, to trust that God is working on our behalf. We may not understand why things are taking longer than expected, but God is never late. He's always right on time. Isolation is where we learn to quiet our hearts and trust in His sovereignty. We learn to rest in the truth that God's timing is always for our good, and that He will bring things to pass when we are ready to receive them. Through these times of waiting and isolation, we grow deeper in our faith, learning to rely not on our own understanding, but on God's perfect plan for our lives. Trusting in His timing transforms our perspective, strengthens our faith, and aligns our heart with His will. There are times in life when we find ourselves in isolation, and during these seasons, it may feel as though everything around us has come to a halt. We may question why we are alone, why the world seems to be moving on while we remain stagnant. But the reality is, isolation is not a setback. It is a process, a divine process that refines our purpose. In the stillness of isolation, we are forced to stop, to reflect, and to listen. This is the moment when God works on us in ways we cannot understand in the busyness of life. We are separated from the distractions, from the noise of the world, so that we can hear His voice clearly. It is in these moments of solitude that God begins to refine our understanding of why we are here, what we are meant to do, and how we are supposed to live. Without isolation, we would continue to move through life without ever fully discovering our true purpose. Isolation brings clarity. It allows us to look inward, to examine our motivations, our desires, and our dreams. Often we spend our lives chasing after things that are not in alignment with our true calling. Things that may seem good in the eyes of others, but fall short of fulfilling the purpose for which we were created. It is only when we are alone that we can face the truth of who we really are and what we are truly meant to do. In the quiet, we realize that we have been called to something greater, something more meaningful than what the world offers. Isolation forces us to confront the distractions in our lives that keep us from walking in our true purpose. It allows us to remove the unnecessary, the things that cloud our vision, and the people who do not align with the vision God has placed within us. It is through this process of refinement that we are shaped into the person capable of fulfilling the purpose we were created for. God does not waste isolation. He uses it to prepare us for the destiny He has set before us. He molds us, He purges us, and He refines us so that we are fully equipped to walk in the calling He has placed on our lives. Purpose is not something we discover by following the crowd or by pursuing what everyone else is pursuing. It is discovered in the quiet moments, in the stillness, and in the solitude when we can truly hear God's voice speaking into our lives. It is in isolation that we gain the strength, wisdom, and clarity needed to move forward with confidence, knowing exactly what we are called to do. Isolation is not meant to be a period of frustration or loneliness. It is a season of preparation. Through this process, we are stripped of everything that isn't in alignment with our purpose. We are refined in the fire so that when the time comes to step into the fullness of our calling, we are ready to embrace it. It is in the quiet that we are shaped, in the solitude that we are prepared, and in the isolation that we are refined. The person we become during these times is the person who will fulfill the purpose for which we were born. There are moments in life when we feel completely separated, isolated from everything and everyone around us. It can feel like the doors have closed and we are left with nothing but silence and solitude. In these moments, it's easy to think that we are being punished or abandoned. But the truth is, isolation is often the very thing that sets us up for new beginnings. In the midst of our isolation, God is doing something profound. He is clearing the path for something new, something greater, that will emerge when the time is right. It is in these seasons of solitude that God prepares us to step into the next chapter of our lives, a chapter that we could never enter unless we had gone through this process. We may think that we are stuck, but in reality, God is positioning us for the new beginnings that are waiting on the other side of our isolation. Isolation forces us to stop and reflect on where we've been, where we are, and where we are going. It is in this stillness that we can no longer ignore the changes that need to take place in our lives. We are forced to confront the things that have been holding us back, the old patterns and behaviors that no longer serve us, and the distractions that have kept us from moving forward. In the quiet of isolation, we are given the space to let go of the past and prepare for the future. It is here that God begins to open our eyes to the new things He has planned for us. When we are in the midst of isolation, it often feels like a season of waiting, but it is actually a season of transformation. God is using this time to prepare us for the new beginnings He is about to bring into our lives. The things we have held on to, the things that have defined us, may need to be stripped away so that we can make room for the new. It is in isolation that we experience a kind of rebirth. We are not the same person we were when we entered this season. We are being shaped, molded, and made ready for the new things that God is preparing. Isolation is not a punishment. It is a divine opportunity for growth. It is in these quiet moments that we are given the chance to realign ourselves with God's purpose for our lives. We are being prepared for new opportunities, new relationships, new assignments, and new levels of success. The isolation we experience is not the end of something, but the beginning of something greater. It is a time for God to do a new work in us, a time for us to shed the old and embrace the new. When the time is right, God will open the doors to the new beginnings that we have been waiting for, but we must be willing to trust the process and embrace the transformation. Isolation, although uncomfortable, is the place where God sets us up for the next chapter of our lives. It is in this place that we are prepared to walk into the fullness of what He has called us to. God is not finished with us yet. And isolation is simply the beginning of the new things He is about to do in our lives.